Hey everyone, hope you're doing well today. I'm going to be going over the economics of college tuition in detail, what has driven those prices up so far, and clear up some misinformation. And using that information, as well as drawing on my experience as a graduate from a top 15 university, how students can find the best value college for them based both on their financial situation as well as their career objectives. I think a lot of online resources either over or under magnify the college rankings, or they focus too much on the prices of tuition. This video is going to give you a very objective overview. You can see the chapters on screen now, and I'm going to be going over things sequentially, but feel free to skip around the video as it best suits you. Now, you've probably seen this chart before showing that college prices have far outpaced inflation. Since 1978, the general prices of economic goods have gone up 3.5% per year, but the cost of tuition has gone up 6.8%. Since 1978, the prices of goods have gone up almost 5 times, but the price of tuition has actually increased almost 16 times. Another way to magnify this is looking at the average starting salaries after college graduation. They've gone up about 2.3 times since 1978, but if we adjust those numbers for inflation, they've actually gone down by 4%. So your effective starting salary has actually decreased slightly. This does peg the question about the value of a college degree. This concept is known as the golden ticket fallacy, where students overestimate the return on investment or value of a college degree and thus are less sensitive to tuition price increases. Students are definitely not to blame here, as many of them are minors when they make their college decision, and this concept is actually not that well known, especially when it comes to the fully loaded costs of going to college. Now, why have college tuition costs increased so much? The short answer is bad structural incentives in the market. There's a lot of factors here at play, but I think the biggest one is the fact that universities are not really liable for the students' ability to repay their loans upon graduation and are not that much affected by the negative outcomes of students from that debt burden. This is largely due to the federal loans program, and I don't think the program itself is bad. I think it's awesome that students have the ability to go wherever they want. The issue is that there's no negative controls on the universities. The problem is, though, that the university isn't really liable directly for the student's ability to repay. While the university's rank and reputation might be affected by the amount of student debt that their graduates have, because of the golden ticket fallacy, students often aren't aware of their debt burdens after college, and this kind of spirals the issue. Since the university doesn't have direct liability and students are less focused on the amount of debt they have upon graduation, universities are less concerned about raising prices. A normal business has to be much more cognizant about raising prices because their customers either won't be able to afford it or won't be willing to pay the price of their goods. That means that your barber can't keep raising haircut prices because otherwise you would just go to a different barber. The thing about universities is that almost all of them participate in the loans program, so they are all kind of doing the same thing with raising prices. Now, that does pose the question, why do universities even need to raise prices to begin with? And there are some understandable factors like higher student enrollment, the fact that professors are relatively more expensive to hire than those without as much education, and the fact that college teaching is a relatively manual process and cannot easily be automated. The real reason colleges raise prices is to be more competitive in the higher education market. Some of this competitive spending is understandable, like more academic research and adding more degree programs. However, a lot of it is to just attract students to the university. Most schools outside of the elite universities are unable to compete well on career outcomes. What I mean by this is only a select few universities have students graduating and immediately earning $100,000 to $150,000 per year in non-STEM degrees like finance and consulting. Most non-STEM graduates earning that much right out of college come from a very select few universities. This means that many universities need to compete on other service offerings such as fancy dorms and buildings, which in some cases can cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build. It also includes student life offerings like events, trips, and t-shirts. All of that stuff is not free. Of course, it is baked into tuition. These costs can get really out of control, with one university even having a lazy river for students, which probably is not the best use of tuition dollars. And I'm not going to name any specific universities here out of respect, but if you were to Google some of the things I'm talking about, you could probably find out which specific universities are in question here. The next big tuition driver is actually administrative bloat. These include non-faculty members or non-professors. A certain number of administrators is certainly necessary as student enrollment grows. However, over the past 50 years, US college administrator headcount has gone up 162%, while college enrollment is only up 67%, which means administrators have grown more than 2.5 times as much as students have. Oftentimes, universities have dozens of administrative departments, and I even found one that was Associate Vice Dean of Intellectual Engagement, and I have no idea what that actually is, but I am pretty certain that that is not necessary for students to attend attend college and get their education. Another example is DEI departments, and one large state university spends over $10 million per year employing 80 DEI professionals. Regardless of if those positions are necessary or not, that $10 million could give over 700 full rides to students for that university. If tuition prices keep growing at 6% annually, they could easily double within the next 10 to 15 years, and being 24 years old, I don't even want to know how much college is going to be for my kids. The takeaway here is due to the fact that the federal loans program does not have a control on university attendance costs, colleges are raising prices out of control to attract more students, and students are sharing the burden of those costs, which is negatively impacting them. Now that we've gone over the structural incentive issue, let's look more into the negative impacts on students, why it's extremely important for parents and students to be informed on the cost of college before attendance. First, an obvious reason is that many of these students are 17 to 18 years old. They don't have any personal finance experience. I know we didn't take any personal finance courses in my public high school. Their parents may not have all of the necessary information in front of them either, and there's definitely misinformation out there. We can quantify this by looking at the average student loan repayment figures. You can see on average, it takes students 20 years to repay their college loans. They have about $30,000 in debt outstanding, and the annual payment is about $6,000 here. This is pretty significant since the average starting salary is only about $50,000, and due to super high salaries in STEM fields, the median is actually quite a bit lower than this figure here. One note here is that these figures are just averages, and I didn't recreate like a debt repayment schedule or anything. That means the interest rate and the repayment figures are going to vary during that repayment period. The point here is that most students are unaware of the financial situation that they're going to enter into, and the rigid 4-year structure of college as well as the mandatory meal costs are not really helping that either. There are 3 potential solutions to the high cost of college. The first one here is governments restricting tuition increases to that of inflation, or inflation plus 1%. Universities could only raise tuition costs by 3% per year if they still wanted to receive government subsidy support and nonprofit status, which means they don't pay taxes. This solution is widely discussed, but it's unclear if it would actually solve the problem. Restrictive policies like this one on other places like rent ceilings have not always worked in the past. The second solution, and I don't hear many people talking about this one, is reducing the credit hour requirements for students. College typically takes 4 years to complete, or 8 semesters, assuming the student takes their full course load and does not change their major. This means that we can look at the price of tuition based on cost per credit hour. Most bachelor degrees take 120 credits to complete, which is done over 8 semesters, and almost 50% of those are gen ed courses. And for me, I was an economics major and I took Spanish, poetry, and prose fiction, which are 3 classes that I don't use at all. And I basically had a semester worth of classes where pretty much everything was kind of irrelevant to my degree. Now, certain gen ed courses like math and writing are definitely helpful for students, especially upon graduation. But the ones that I mentioned before, like Spanish and poetry, probably not useful for most people. These gen ed courses can take up 2 years, which effectively makes students stay in college twice as long as they need to and effectively double the tuition cost for them. It not only puts unnecessary pressure on students, but also keeps them out of the workforce for an additional 2 years. Now, to be clear, I'm talking about reducing gen ed requirements. I'm not saying that we should scrap liberal arts degrees. I think those topics have a great place in our society and are definitely useful. What I'm saying is reduce the amount of gen ed courses that are unrelated to the degree that the student is getting. Unfortunately, I don't really see this one happening because students taking courses for 4 years is fundamental to the university's business model, but nonetheless, it is a big embedded cost of college. Number 3 is the government actually paying for college for students rather than writing loans to them. This one is very interesting and actually pretty controversial as well. There's a Georgetown economic study claiming that Biden's free college program for people making under $120,000 per year would actually pay for itself in 10 years. I will link the study below, but basically the rationale is by enabling more students to go to school by paying for college, those students would earn more money after graduation and then pay more tax revenue, which would actually pay for itself after 10 years. And second, since there wouldn't be student debt, those with loans would not be deducting $2,500 per year from their taxes. That would be increased tax revenue for the government. I think this third solution is interesting. I'm not really sure it would work. And second, families making slightly above $125,000 per year wouldn't be eligible for free college and still might have some trouble paying for it. Okay, now that we've gone over the cost of college tuition in a lot of detail, let's shift over to the different types of schools and determine which types of schools offer the best ROI for students depending on their financial needs as well as target career outcomes. I think I have a unique perspective on this because I transferred from a university that was not even ranked to a top 15 ranked university, so I've seen both sides of the coin in terms of career outcomes and the academic settings there. The three biggest mistakes I see are, number one, either overemphasizing or underemphasizing the college rankings. I think that really depends on your career outcomes, and the rankings could matter a lot or a little depending on what you want to do. Number two is comparing starting salaries between two universities. The goals of students at those two universities could differ. You could have two elite colleges and one is a liberal arts college where students are much more focused on impact work and less focused on making money. And you could have another elite university focused a lot on business careers and those students are working in finance, making a lot of money. However, given the reputation of both schools, you could easily get a super high paying job from either one. Number three is looking too much at the sticker price of tuition and not the average cost after aid. Average cost after aid actually goes down for those best ranked universities and are oftentimes lower than that of other private schools that are not ranked. This is a great thing, and students from low income backgrounds graduate with no debt and possibly up to like $5,000 of debt. That presents the question, when does school choice matter? We can look at this through a return on investment standpoint as well as education quality. Ultimately, I think ROI is the most important because while the experience you receive at college is definitely important, at the end of the day, you're going to college to build up your career and put yourself in a better situations. This leads us into point number two, which is career recruiting. This will address the question, does ranking or prestige matter? And honestly, it really just depends on what field you're going into. I'm breaking this down by some of the career outcomes that students from elite universities go into. I can speak most on the consulting and finance side since I work in finance. Starting out with consulting, the top ranked firms like McKinsey and Bain and a few others definitely select from a small number of elite universities and colleges. So if you're looking to get a job at one of those, going to a top ranked school is definitely pretty important. Maybe not absolutely necessary, but it will significantly increase your chances. Next, regarding finance careers, I can probably speak most on this one since I work in investing. If you're looking to go into investment banking or private equity, it will definitely help a lot to go to a top ranked school, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I know several people at a lot of the top firms who come from schools that are not ranked and they have succeeded very well at those places. Next, for asset management, I think it depends on the place you're going to work, but overall, I don't think it's super important. Any other banking, finance, insurance roles, excluding hedge funds and private equity, I don't think it really matters where you go to school at all. Med school, I'm less aware of, but I think if you are at an elite university and you have a really good GPA, that can help your chances of getting into med school, but you're not necessarily hurt by going to a lower ranked school as long as you have a good GPA. For PhDs, I think for the most part, it doesn't really matter unless you are trying to get into the most elite competitive PhD programs that have such few spots. Those ones might just recruit from better undergraduate schools because it's just another criteria point they have since it's so competitive. And for law school, I was thinking about law school at one point, and from my research, it's about 75% your LSAT score and 25% your GPA. Your undergrad school choice might very slightly matter in the law school admissions process, and it could matter if you are looking for a job after law school and you're trying to network with alumni of your undergraduate institution. Third, let's look at the education quality of top ranked schools. Again, my first school I went to was non-ranked, and then my second one was very highly ranked in the US News rankings. The biggest pro for me was the student body being very motivated, always, asking questions in class, really challenging each other, and it really made it a good academic environment. Neutral aspects of going to an elite school versus a non-ranked one. Generally, the course material and content was the same, so I had to retake 2 classes from my old school to my new school, and what we actually learned in the course material was pretty much the same between them. And then professor quality, I think it was very similar between the two schools. The professors at the elite school obviously had more research publications and were sort of better known in their academia space. And then for cons of going to an elite school, the tests I took tended to be a lot more nitty gritty. My econ coursework would test a lot of like algebra and calculus, and I think at the expense a little bit of some of the economic theory. And I think that was partly to control grade inflation in the class. Summing it up here, I think the ROI and the career outcomes are much more important than the quality of the education, which I think is relatively uniform across schools. Okay, we've gone over tuition in detail and things that determine school quality. Now let's bucket the different types of schools. First, we have top 20 universities and top 5 liberal arts schools. For this bucket, I'm using the rankings methodology from 2023 and before. Basically, for 2024, there was a significant change to the rankings. Because the weights of the rankings shifted, I I think really high quality schools were penalized and some of them were pushed out of the top 20. As I mentioned, these top schools have very good financial aid and excellent career outcomes as well. My recommendation is if you can get into one of these schools, definitely attend them. It will certainly be worth it and you should not have a huge financial burden upon graduation. The next bucket, which has some overlap with the first one, is top ranked state schools in the US. These include schools like UCLA, Texas, Michigan, Indiana, UNC Chapel Hill. Generally, these schools place very well across all fields, especially in finance and consulting. For finance and consulting, some of these top state schools actually place better than schools from the top 20. Again, really depends on where you go and what your target outcomes are. The in-state tuition for these schools is extremely attractive. If you live in one of these states, these top schools could be even better choices than those in the top 20. However, if you're out of state, the tuition can get very expensive, and sometimes these schools don't offer you the same amount of aid as elite universities do. Our third bucket is other state schools. You can think of flagship ones as the ones with the best football teams that were not bucketed into bucket number 2. If you live in state and you're not pursuing a super competitive field, these schools could be great options for you. I don't think they're quite as good as the other ones I've mentioned. If you're looking to attend one of these flagship state schools and you don't live in that state, the tuition can get extremely expensive. I also don't think the outcomes from these schools justify the higher prices, which means I'd be very careful if you are looking at attending one of these out of state. And second part of this bucket is other state schools that are not flagship ones. I think if you're not going into a super competitive field and some of the other options aren't on the table, these ones are certainly not bad choices at all. Last bucket is lower ranked private schools that are not in the top 20 to 30 schools. A lot of these schools have tuition in the $40,000 to $60,000 range, but the average cost after aid is actually higher than that of elite universities. Moreover, these schools have a significantly less portion of students entering competitive fields like finance and consulting. If you're looking to go into one of those fields, I probably would avoid these schools. Overall, I'd be very careful with attending these schools unless you are receiving a significant amount of financial aid. Lastly, keep in mind these are objective opinions and students can succeed from any school they attend if they work hard enough. Summing it up here, college prices have increased significantly and there's a lot of hidden costs given the golden ticket fallacy and some of the misaligned incentives in the higher ed market. While I still think getting a college degree is very beneficial, it's not absolutely more beneficial than it used to be 50 years ago, given the fact that tuition costs have gone up so much and effective starting salaries after adjusting for inflation have not increased. And takeaways to parents and students is that always be aware of the actual cost of college, including the debt load, and really think about it from an ad hoc approach, considering career outcomes as well when choosing schools. If there's any other areas you all want me to explore or make follow-up videos on, I'm happy to do that and would love to explore these topics in more detail. If you all enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe if you're interested, and I will see you all in the next one.